So some people get annoyed when I talk about David Haye. People say, why'd you waste your time talking about this prima donna? He's been retired from the sport for years. And people don't like to hear me discuss him. But the truth is that for every person who doesn't like me discussing David Haye, there are two people who probably send a request saying, could you talk about David Haye? He's a very controversial figure. Fans like him, fans hate him. But let's be honest, at his best he's one of the most exciting guys in the sport. And in terms of the heavyweight scene, in terms of the British heavyweight scene, to me, he's always going to be relevant. Relevant in the same sense that Lennox Lewis is always going to be relevant. Now, I'm not saying Haye is the same fighter Lennox is. I'm not saying he's got the same resume, the same history, the same legacy. But, what I'm saying is that given how that we're not so far removed from Haye's career, he's always a guy who's going to be worth discussing in my eyes. I'm a fan of his. I've been to a few of his fights live. I've followed his career, and he's always someone I keep one eye on. A few people got in touch to ask about the article that appeared on a few different sites. I saw it on Boxing Scene with David Haye saying that he'd like to come back and like to have a fight with Anthony Joshua at Wembley Stadium. And for the purposes of this video, we will discuss how I see that fight going if it did occur. Now, clearly, I'm not saying it's going to happen. Yeah, quite frankly, David Haye's been coming back for so long now, and we're yet to see him back in the ring. Will he ever fight again? That's anyone's guess. Will he still be the same fighter if he does fight again? That's an even bigger intangible. Will Eddie Hearn risk his golden child against David Haye? Even less likely. It's not a fight that I'm saying I see as likely, but it's a fight that I'm interested to discuss. And in the likely event that this fight doesn't happen, then I'm still interested to discuss this fight. Because put simply, I find it very, very interesting, and I like the idea of the fantasy matchup between these two guys. So let's discuss. Now, for the first thing, a lot of people say I hate on Anthony Joshua and I'm harsh on Anthony Joshua. I don't hate on Anthony Joshua. I don't want Anthony Joshua to fail. Perhaps some of his fans who think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread annoy me slightly. But, a British heavyweight going to the top, that's something that I'm, keen to support. I'm just not keen to jump on the hype bandwagon. David Haye, if he was to fight Anthony Joshua now, there'd be questions in my mind about David Haye. Now let me put it like this. Let's begin like this. If you picture David Haye at his best, you do one of a number of things, in my eyes. You picture him knocking out Derek Chisora. You picture him in the Ruiz fight. You picture him maybe against Audley Harrison. You picture him at cruiserweight. In other words, what you see David Haye as is this all-action, aggressive, output fighter. Throwing leather, throwing power punches, throwing combinations, speed, power, aggression, KOs. There are two fights in his career where Haye became a low output guy. And that's Vladimir Klitschko and Nikolai Valuev. Suddenly, the David Haye that we saw against Derek Chisora, for example, who came out, who won the early rounds, who used a jab, who boxed, was less there. Put simply, I do not believe that David Haye is at his best against taller fighters. In my eyes, David Haye is what, I would call an ambush fighter. He likes to operate outside, then he likes to charge in. And I think he struggles against much taller, rangier opponents who've got good jabs and who can try and control the range and control the distance with him. For me, Vladimir Klitschko was able to take that ambush style away from him. To a lesser extent, the slow, heavy-footed, robotic Nikolai Valuev was able to have success against David Haye. Yeah, I know it's controversial, but I still see Nikolai Valuev winning that fight, and I'm a big David Haye fan. But for me, Haye was too low output. Haye was too passive. You know, we all remember the spell in the last round where he rocked Valuev and made him do a bit of a chicken dance, but, you know, for me, Valuev was the come-forward fighter who wanted to fight that night. And for me, it's something about taller fighters with a jab who can try and control the range and who can try and push the pace. For me, that turns David Haye into a low-output guy who, you know, relies on head movement, relies on reflexes and tries to stay outside of the jab, and who's perhaps cautious of rushing in and ambushing, aware that he might get caught on the way in. For me, David Haye's not at his best against tall guys with a jab. Yeah, I picked Tyson Fury to beat David Haye when the two were due to square off, and I think, yeah, I know David Haye is a much better fighter than Chisora and Christian Hamer, but I think an advanced tall man like Tyson Fury could have done a similar job on David Haye. I'm not saying he'd have made David Haye look as bad as he made Christian Hamer and Derek Chisora look, but it wouldn't have surprised me if the story of that night was Tyson Fury controlling the fight from range. You know, Tyson Fury's good at that. David Haye's weak against tall men. It's just my opinion. Now, I could see Anthony Joshua having similar effect. You know, Anthony Joshua, if he could stay disciplined, probably has a better jab than Nikolai Valuev. He's certainly a lot more athletic, a lot more, in my opinion, his jab is probably a better weapon than Valuev's. He's a big man. Yeah, I know David Haye knocked out Audley Harrison, but Anthony Joshua looks a level above that. And for me, he could make David Haye nervous with his power and his jab and his size. I don't rule Anthony Joshua out of the fight, actually. You know, I think styles make fights. And whilst there's a few guys I'd pick over Anthony Joshua, I think David Haye Joshua is pretty 50-50. It wouldn't surprise me if David Haye went to his low volume style that we've seen him fall into, and suddenly the David Haye of cruiserweight days against Macronelli and Mormek is no more. You've got to factor in inactivity. You've also got to factor in the fact that David Haye, who hasn't fought for, 2.5 years now, is a guy whose style relied on speed and explosiveness. And that's a style that potentially doesn't age very well. Arguably, David Haye is a similar type of fighter to Manny Pacquiao. You know, he's not a guy who's he's relying on that explosiveness, that speed, the hand speed, the furious combinations, the power punching. Suddenly, if you're inactive for a few years, you're getting into your 30s, your mid-30s even, perhaps that style doesn't age as well as a Floyd Mayweather or a Bernard Hopkins. And you wonder, could the combination of inactivity, could the combination of living the celebrity lifestyle of age affect a style like David Haye? When I've seen David Haye recently, he's been looking big, heavy, no longer a cruiserweight, very much a sort of muscular bodybuilder type physique, perhaps carrying a bit more fat than we used to with David Haye. Once again, you have to ask, how's that going to affect his style? I mean, for me, David Haye didn't have concerns over his power. We knew he was a very big puncher at 15 stone. I don't necessarily see him needing to put on an extra stone of weight to be a bigger puncher. If anything, with a guy like David Haye, whose power is so strong to begin with, perhaps it was more the speed that was helping to generate that power rather than the weight. So I wonder. For me, there's a lot of intangibles about David Haye's return. He's getting old. How's that going to affect his game, especially given his style? He's heavier. He's been inactive. He's living the celebrity lifestyle. It's all adding up, especially when you factor in that I've got this preconceived concern about him dealing with taller fighters. Now, with Anthony Joshua, I've talked about my concerns with him in other videos. The main ones being stamina, the lack of fighting quality opponents, and questions about his chin. We know he got hurt by Dillian White in the amateurs. There's rumours David Price KO'd him in sparring. Clearly, David Haye has a chance of knocking Joshua out. Joshua's chin is unproven. We've not really seen him get punched in a pro ring. And to go from guys who are too scared to hit him back to a guy like David Haye, who legitimately is one of the hardest punchers in the sport, it's a huge leap. David Haye, with his experience, with the power he brings to the table, he has to be a massive favourite in the fight, realistically, given the level he's performed at. People are critical of David Haye's chin. They say he's got no chin and no heart. But don't forget, this guy went 12 rounds with Vladimir Klitschko. This guy has gone the distance with Nikolai Valuev. We've seen him go late in multiple other fights. And as hard as Anthony Joshua hits, he's done nothing in the ring so that he can hit as hard as Vladimir Klitschko in my eyes. And we've seen David Haye take Klitschko's right hand on his chin and keep fighting. So I don't necessarily have concerns about Haye's chin in the fight. If anything, the concerns are with Joshua's chin and Joshua's stamina. The other thing is, Joshua's never fought an opponent with the movement of Haye, the speed of Haye, the technique of Haye, even the jab of Haye. I know Haye's a smaller guy. Certainly not the power of David Haye. Of course, it's too much too soon for Anthony Joshua at this stage. But, realistically, Haye's going to want 2 or 3 combat fights before fighting Joshua. If Joshua gets more learning fights, and I don't know, takes on a Ustinov, takes on a Dillian White, takes on a Manuel Char, and looks as devastating as he's done so far, potentially it goes to a 50-50 fight. And potentially an older David Haye can once again not be at his best against a taller opponent with a jab. I see it as a fascinating fight. Right now, I think Anthony Joshua said himself he thinks David Haye's a level above, and I agree. Right now, David Haye's the favourite. But I don't see it as impossible that Anthony Joshua could beat David Haye. I think Tyson Fury beats them both, but that's a story for another video. Let me know your thoughts. Many thanks for watching. Keen to discuss.